Now, let's go back to Kant again because we will need him. So remember, what's his division into phenomena and noumena? By now, hopefully, like on the third try. So the basic picture again is like this. We have a human mind, we have any kind of object. This is just a genetic object. Table, chair, whatever. The traditional understanding is we get this object into our mind through what? Sense, right? So light coming into our mind through our eyes, sounds, and so on. What did Kant say? There's nothing whole story. Right? It's partly true. There's another thing which our mind contributes to the object. Our mind kind of forms the object while applying all these categories we have. And that is the phenomena. So how about noumena? What exactly is noumena according to Kant?
It's like abstract concepts like knowledge.
Well, the real thing, right? The real object without our contribution. Which of course we cannot know according to Kant. But we can kind of imagine the concept. Right? If indeed object is distorted by our mind, there should be some real object which is not distorted by our mind. And that would be the nomen. And he called it thing in itself. Okay. So what was his categorical imperative that going to his ethics? Categorical imperative. Remember, he said there are three formulations. And that's how you can figure out whether or not it's moral to do something. Like if you want to steal something, how do you figure out whether you should steal it or not? According to Kant.
Was it based on your duty? Was it based on like someone's duty?
Yeah, it's based on duty, but what's the duty? What's the rule? When you decided for yourself, should I steal it or not? What should you ask yourself? Do I want it to be a universal law? Do I want everyone to do it? And if the answer is no, then you shouldn't do it either. And if the answer is yes, then go ahead. So that's how Kant said that that's the categorical imperative, that you should do everything as if it becomes a universal law, and whatever you do, you should first ask yourself, do I want that to be a universal law? Hegel will find weakness in it, as we will see. But that's the simple way to describe it. What role did reason play in Kant's ethical theory? Hopefully that is the easy question. What is the role? Was it like not important, somewhat important? Because remember that for Hume it was all feeling. That the reason is just a servant to the feeling. How about Kant? You guys listening or just like browsing Facebook or something? That should be an easy question. Fundamental role is the most important role. The whole thing is based on reason. He's saying that's the reason. Reason itself legislates. Because you, when you ask yourself, do I want it to be universal law, are using what? Your reason. It has nothing to do with your feelings. Your feelings don't matter in this case. Just your reason. And your reason tells you, no, you should not steal because I don't think it's a good rule for us all to follow. Okay, and should we follow our duty or should we follow our desire? And based on this, that's another simple question. Duty, of course, not the desires. Duty. You should only follow your duty. He was, by the way, Puritan. Do you guys know the Puritans, the Christian denomination of Puritans? It's a very, very kind of, how should I put it, strict way to believe in God. So for Puritans, You should just do your duty all the time. And whether or not good things follow from it doesn't matter. Because that's the law of God. The God told you to do it. So you should do it. That's it. End of story. One question. So you can kind of see his philosophy is related to his upbringing, right? Not a maverick in that sense. But yeah, so that's the Puritan kind of approach. By the way, they say that the major reason why capitalism got so successful in Western Europe is because of this Puritan approach. The Puritans also immigrated to America, and they immigrated to America because in Europe, in many countries, Catholics persecuted them. So when they came here, they had the same approach. And that approach works very well in capitalism, right? You just work. You just do your duty. How much you pay doesn't matter. Whether you ever get rich doesn't matter. Just do your duty. Work every day as much as you can. And that actually does bring results. Because if you do that, then these things get built and society flourishes. And if you start questioning and thinking, hey, how about I don't work, but instead just find a way around the system to enrich myself, then of course that stops working, because then everybody is just trying to outsmart each other. A lot of smart people are trying to... Anyway, okay, let's go back to Hegel. So remember, Hegel is an idealist, but he is not the same type of idealist as Berkeley was. He calls himself objective idealist. In fact, to him, it all comes down to absolute idea or spirit. So he calls himself absolute idealist. Absolute idealist. What exactly does it mean? Do objects exist in our mind only as for Berkeley? No. That is subjective idealism. According to Hegel, objects do exist independently of us. They do not depend on our mind, but the difference is this. The reason and the idea is inherited in the world just as it is in our mind. So basically, it is kind of this two-way street, but object then is part of our mind just as much as our mind is part of the object. So that's why he says that the thing in itself to him doesn't make any sense. What does it mean to him itself? It's just that our mind can have adequate or inadequate conception of the world. And if it is inadequate, then it will be destroyed. But you can do better, and you can understand the world even 100%, because the mind is out there in the world, and the world rationally responds to you. So if you do things using reason, the things actually work out well. And if you don't, then they work out better. But that requires a process. And this process is the entire humanity going through from the beginning, and it's obviously not done yet, but we have achieved a lot, haven't we? Compared to like cavemen, clearly we have a lot better grasp on life. People back then were suffering all the time from everything. They were running around hunting those wild animals to get themselves food. If you kill the wild animal, you're lucky. If not, then wild animal kills you, and you're not lucky. No medical care or anything. You just die painful, horrible death. That certainly was not a fun times to live in. And even in medieval times, it was still not fantastic, because remember, they had all these diseases too, the plague epidemic, whatever, and people were trying to cure it by some smoke or some other weird stuff, the grass, collecting some grass, trying to eat this grass. Well, they didn't know any better, so, and then at the same time, they were not washing their hands, which is actually one of the biggest reasons why the plague spread so quickly. They were carrying dead people, burying them, then touching food, touching their mouth with the same hands, and of course they were getting sick and dying. And they were like, why am I dying? Well, that's why, but they didn't know any better. They didn't have any soap even. Although they were kind of trying to wash themselves periodically with water and a variety of different substances, but that was not as good as the soap, and certainly they didn't have hand sanitizer. So you can imagine that, of course, that was pretty bad way to exist. So Hegel says absolute idealism. The absolute is something completely self-contained that does not need anything else for its existence. A lot of it is related to Spinoza, which is why I told you guys Spinoza was very influential. So the living substance, according to Hegel, is being which is in truth subject. So substance, which is every inanimate object, is the same thing as the subject, which is we. Marx later will kind of, as he says it, turn it upside down. He will switch the emphasis. But for Hegel, everything is an idea, and so the objects are part of their mind and everything. Rather than objects having their existence within individual minds, Hegel's absolute idealism claims that the mind is inherent in the objects. Hegel explains that there is an intimacy between the mind and reality. To him who looks at the world rationally, the world looks rationally back. And of course, to him who looks at the world irrationally, what does the world do? Looks back irrationally at them. So what's the relation between mind and nature? The concepts are really out there. They are part of the reality. They are not something separate. And so the concept is the genuine first. The things are what they are through the action of the concept, even in them, revealing themselves in them. Humanity is conscious of itself, but the nature is a petrified or unconscious intelligence. So we are part of nature, of course. It's just that nature cannot look at itself and reflect. Right? The stones don't think, why am I a stone? But we can. So that's the difference. With humanity, a part of nature has emerged that is not only conscious, but self-conscious. Right? What's the difference between consciousness and self-consciousness? Conscious, you can be conscious of the object around you. And that's what we typically are. Like I'm conscious of the fact that we have tables, chairs, and a bunch of students in this room. But self-consciousness is also being conscious of yourself. So I'm conscious of the fact that I'm standing here, another human being, and talking to you right now. So that is what we have and what is amazing. It's truly amazing. If you think about it, the fact that a part of nature can really look at itself, study itself, try to understand itself, and each one of us is just that, is absolutely amazing. Okay, so Hegel avoids Cartesian dualism by basically saying something which is similar to Spinoza, that the idea and reality are just two poles, basically the two poles of the same continuum, mind and matter. We can look at it from two different points of view. We can think that everything is a mind and an idea, or we can think of everything as being matter, which again, both of them kind of make sense. It's just two different points of view on the same thing. Schelling, who remember was his friend who helped him out with the academy, and later, by the way, got very, very sour at him because he will criticize Schelling. In Phenomenology of Spirit, he almost made fun of him, and Schelling got very, very upset about it. They never spoke for the rest of their lives. Schelling lived way longer than Hegel, and let's not go there, but he was not Hegel. So Schelling's view was that the mind is most organized and developed form of matter, and matter is the least organized and developed form of mind. And that is something which Hegel agreed with. In fact, a lot of their philosophy overlaps and is very similar. Now, how is the absolute spirit and human spirit related? The spirit, or Geist, is the whole which is larger than the sum of individual members. So we are all part of this spirit. But even if you take all of us together, the sum of us is larger than just each one of us has. That's an interesting thing because you can see it in this way very easily. If you have one person, no matter how smart they are not as smart as having two people, and not as smart as having three people. And that works very well, for example, like it might be what you want to do when I have students work in groups. This group's always smarter than each one of the students. Even the smartest student in the group cannot be as smart as the entire group. Always some exceptions. Sometimes one student is smart, everybody else is just tailgate. But in some cases, in most cases, let's put it this way, that's not the case. They kind of contribute to each other. One student thinks, okay, I got it. I absolutely know the answer. Once they start sharing it with the others start criticizing it and saying, oh, hold on. What about this? Oh, I didn't think of that. Right? And then together you can come up with much better results. And it works like this everywhere. Human beings in the group always work better. They bounce ideas of each other. To yourself, you may think, I am so smart. I know everything. It is so obvious to me. But once you start working with other people, at first you may see this resistance, right? When they try to disagree with you, and you're like, well, they must be stupid. Because how can anybody disagree with me? But then you discover that actually they have a point. And then you get smarter as a result. So that's how it works. Okay, now let's talk about the reading, because that's a good point for that. So what did you think, first of all? Did you guys do the reading? It is difficult, right? But like, did you catch anything? First of all, who's the master, who's the servant? Did anybody get to the end of it? No? He writes in a difficult language, but there is a good point. So what's happening between master and the servant? Anything happening? What about that? Anything about that? Who's dying?
Well, the master and servant, weren't they trying to fight for control? Because
yes, they fight each other, right? To death. And then they don't actually die. But one of them becomes master, and the other one becomes servant. So that is an interesting model of human relations. It's not some sort of fairy tale. That actually is a reconstruction of what's happening between the human beings, and a very simple type of model. So here's what really you should think about. This is the stage when many philosophers started thinking about the object, right? In Kant, this is the object, in Locke, it's the object, everything. But I mentioned it last time. There certainly are objects and objects, because there are objects in this room like tables and chairs, and they are very different from another type of object, which is what? All of you guys. Which, technically speaking, is also an object, right? It is an object. When I look at tables and chairs, and when I look at people, I see some sort of a shape which, for all I know, is very similar. It's just different color and different shape. But nonetheless, there is an important difference, which is what? You can do whatever you want with the tables and chairs. You can move them around. You can break them. What about people? Can you do that to people? What do you think? You deal with people, don't you? Can you do that to them? Can you move them around and break them? Not really.
no, that's to a certain extent, I think.
Well, I don't know to what extent can you do. I mean, did you try to move somebody around? Try it now. Go ahead. Move somebody. Yeah. What are they going to do? Are they going to just... Because the chair, ain't moving the chair, right? The chair doesn't do anything. There you go. The chair moves. You move it right back. There you go. What do you think happens if I try it to you? At the very least, you're like, what the hell are you doing, Professor? Are you gone nuts? So it's not easy. Not only that, but the other people actually try to move you around. Right? And even if they don't do it physically, they try to do it with their words. The people constantly have these kind of control games with each other. Anytime two people meet, there is this control game. And this is like the beginning point here. So self-consciousness in and for itself, while and as a result of its being in and for itself for another, it is only as recognized being. So when you meet the other human being, one of the things you want is recognition. You want the other human being to recognize you as a human being, because you understand that this is the much more important than with objects, where objects don't even see you, but the other human being does see you, and in all the ways it's just like you. So of course you want them to recognize you and to treat you as a wonderful human being like you are. But they also want that. And this is where the problems begin. Because you do want people to behave in a certain way. And they want you to behave in a certain way. But is it always the same? Is it easy to achieve? No, that's the most difficult thing. And people discover it also very early on. So it started from this type of relationship when some human beings try to control the others, and the others try to resist. And what then happens is, we don't see it as much today because people don't fight to their death today. But you can imagine that at the beginning of time, that was what was happening all the time. Because what is the most ultimate sacrifice you can make? Give up your life, right? There's nothing bigger than that. Nothing. And that is what has to be at stake then. Because if you want to achieve something from somebody else, and they resist it, then the ultimate price you can put is your life on the line against their life. And this is how wars begin, right? Because again, in the war, people reach the point when words no longer work. And so they have to put their life on the line. Like, I am going to kill you, or you're going to kill me. And that's going to be the resolution, because if one of us is dead, the other one is won. But of course, you can't just do it to them, because they can do it to you too. Right? So this is when human beings actually kind of measure up against each other. But if they don't die, then what happens? One of them submits the other. Because then the person who either chickened out and didn't want to risk their life, or they tried to risk it, but they got defeated, that person has to give up. And the person who won actually takes control, right? Which is how the first lords and kings appeared. That wasn't at first like the democratic election, right? How was it back in those days? The strongest, the cleverest person was able to gain control of everybody, and he may have even been challenged, or she, I don't know, in some societies actually women were in charge, the Amazons. That's not something impossible. It's mainly during the medieval years and so on, when for some reason men got completely in charge. Back in time, not all. So anyway, but that person who is the most brave, capable of put their life on the line, was becoming a master, and the other person becoming their servant. So it's a trial by death. That's what he talks about. It is solely by staking one's life that freedom is proven to be essence. If you can stake your life on a line and then submit the other person, then you really have your freedom, and they lose their freedom. Because then you control them. Okay, now the winner becomes a master. Master is self-sufficient for master got the recognition, but there are problems immediately emerge with that. The first problem is master now has the servant do everything for him. So master depends on the servant. The servant is the one who produces everything for the master, right? But the master is not able to take care of himself. That's one thing. The other thing in terms of self-recognition, you are recognized by somebody. And that's the thing in life. You are recognized by somebody. But if you defeated them and forced them to recognize you, how much is this recognition worth? Not very much, right? Because it's not a true recognition. You force them to do it. And that's not what you ultimately want. You ultimately want to admit that you are such a great and smart person, but not by force. So even if you force them to do that, that actually has no value for you. That is something which plays out between people all the time, and that's like normal in terms of like just your boyfriend and girlfriend relationship, right? Because what happens when two people live together, do everything together? There's all these types of conflicts. Not to death, hopefully. Well, sometimes it could be, but for the most part, not to death. But, it is a normal part of the relationship. Somebody says, I want to go watch a movie. And the other person says, no, I want to go to a football game. And what do you do now? Who is going to give up? This is the power struggle, right? So you can force the other person to do whatever you want and submit to your will. But then what's the downside? Are they going to be happy in this relationship? Probably not. You can also give up whatever you want and do what they want. But then you feel kind of left out. And so how do you approach that? Even with the people closest to you. But it's not just the people closest to you. You have the same exact relationship with all sorts of people, with perfect strangers. There's like road rage incidents. Or whatever may happen, like, I don't know, in a grocery store, somewhere, in a line. This happens all the time. What's the correct approach to this? So this is something which extremely important. And the way, in the end, Hegel makes an emphasis is on more of a, I guess, economic relations of labor domination. And this specific piece will make huge impact on Marx. Because Marx, when he read it, also realized what Hegel is talking about. So once the master submits somebody and makes him a slave and makes him to work to produce for the master then depends on that slave, depends on that person who is providing all the livelihood for the master. So the tables kind of turn. The people who are on the bottom actually turned out to be more important than the people on top because they are the ones who work. They are the ones who produce everything. Whereas masters are just sitting there leisurely and not doing anything. So while domination at some point seemed like a victory, it turns into defeat. So that's something which we will see with Marx. And then this is also important for Hegel's ethics. He calls his ethics, the foundation of his ethics, Sittlichkeit, which means community life. The translation from German, although it's better to use usually the German word, because it's not, again, exactly translates what Sittlichkeit in German means. So we are born into the community, become fully mature persons by being socialized. From the very beginning, we define our self-identity and form our concepts of overall scheme of things in terms of our communal life. What society are we part of? For Hegel, ethics is not a set of moral commandments as it is for Kant. He says the entire thing comes from your community, from the people you live with, from the society you live with. The ethical life of a community includes explicit rules as well as implicit attitudes, values, and forms of life. We learn them as children, and they become part of us. Rational ideal unfolding in them is moving towards universal ethics, but rather slowly. It's not there yet. So, three parts of a society are in Sittlichkeit. First of all, the family. The family is the most basic nucleus of community, right? You have your family. Hopefully all of you guys have family. If you don't, that's not good. But most people do. You have a family. However, is that the end of it? No, obviously family is only part of the broader society, so another part of it is the civil society. Civil society, he means, is the economic one. The economic relations, profit, mutual benefit, that is another part of this community which is integral to it. But there's a third part, and it is the state. The state, actually, according to Hegel, when he says the state, he means all three. Family is part of the state, the civil society is part of the state, and also the political system is part of the state. And according to Hegel, that actually is the most important part. Only in the state the person becomes truly free. The person by itself is not free. But in the state, the person is free. That's probably the opposite of the way we usually think about it in America, right? Everybody, well, not everybody, but it's very popular now to talk about less state. Let's remove the state. The state is just this constraint which holds us back. Wonderful individuals as we are. On our own, we are so free and wonderful. But the state is what gets in the way all the time, the stupid state. Right now, they're trying to remove as much of the state as possible, firing all these federal workers, right? That's the idea. That's what Trump is trying to accomplish, less state. Well, actually, Hegel thinks the opposite. He thinks the state is what makes you free. You are not free without the state. Now, he talks first about the Greek city-states, and to him that was actually a wonderful way to live. The Greek city-states represent an early model of ethical community in which people find their identity, happiness, and a sense of meaning by participating in the life of the community. So that was wonderful, but it had a serious flaw. People didn't do so unreflectively. They were just going with the flow. They were not thinking, why is it important? How should it be approached? And so later on, remember we talked about it when we talked about ancient Greece, the individualistic morality started to emerge. This individualistic approach, which we again see today, which is basically based on the fact that since all values are relative, then maybe there's no values. And then the only thing which is important is my own happiness, and I can achieve that at the expense of everybody else. If I'm smarter, if I'm faster, if I'm more clever than other people, I can outsmart all of them and be happy by myself. Right? Because at the end of the day, my happiness is the only one which matters. But that led to the deterioration of society. And as a result, then each one became their own living truth, and so there is no truth. And so the whole thing started to collapse. So then Hegel also brings interesting concept which Marx will pick up, and the reading for Marx, which I want you to do for after the exam, is on alienation. But Hegel looked at alienation slightly differently than Marx. So what exactly is alienation? This is what happened to the Greeks. The concept of alienation is very simple. You're not happy. Why? Well, for Greeks, there was this separation of public and private life, which was making them unhappy. Public life was not, the private life, their own life, was not seamlessly integrated into the society. And this is still the source of alienation the way Marx looked at it. So basically, you live in society. You can't get away from this society, but you're not happy because something is going wrong. And of course, ideally, everybody should be happy within the society. So how can that be achieved? That's the big question, right? Hegel examines a number of attempts to develop individualistic ethics. In each case, he argues morality they embrace depends on a concept that can be only made meaningful within the shared practices of the community as a whole. You think that sometimes people rebel against the community, but in reality, when they rebel, they actually try to reinforce the same values that the community already holds, except community sometimes may be hypocritical about it. So if you look at the morality the way Kant was approaching it, it seems like your mind can generate it out of thin air. It just comes up with this idea that you should do whatever you think everybody should do and follow it, and that would be wonderful. But Hegel thinks it's absolutely bloodless formal principles which don't tell you anything about how to live your life. It's absolutely useless for day-to-day kind of problems which you may be facing. The solution to these problems is not in these kind of principles. In particular, conflict with desire. Can really anybody follow the principle against their will, against their desire? So you think that the principle tells you one thing, but you desire something else. So which one would you then do? And Hegel thinks it's a common sense that you will go after your desire, because these principles will not mean very much to you. You may accept them in some sort of theoretical way, but you're not going to leave them out. So desire is what leads you. Your desire should accord to these principles. If it doesn't, you cannot live your life. Desire, duty and desire must coincide. He criticized Kant as well in terms of the how this universal law can even be generated. So here's a good example. He says about stealing. Is stealing really bad? Kant thinks that if you steal something, you contradict yourself because you don't want that to become a universal law. But that only contradicts the principle that everybody should have their own private property, right? But let's say you disagree with that. Let's say you think that there should be no private property. In that case, is there a contradiction that you steal from other people? No, there's no contradiction. So you simply, the contradiction is you cannot in the same time hold these two principles, a rule that justifies stealing and the institution of private property. But if you disagree with the institution of private property in the first place, then there is no problem. There is no contradiction. You can steal. So that is, of course, something which, again, people, how do they decide on that? For the most part, based on what their community rules are, rather than some sort of abstract principle. So it's not a contradiction in itself. There is nothing logically wrong with holding any of these principles. And also, when you apply these kinds of principles to real life, things may not be easy. There's the famous example, which we're not going to talk about Sartre, but Sartre, 20th century philosopher, brings it as an example in one of his books. He says, a student came to me and asked, here's the dilemma I have. I want to go, it was during the World War II, I want to go fight the Nazis. But my mother is very sick, and I need to take care of her. So what should I do? Should I leave my mother and fight the Nazis, or should I stay and take care of my mother? So Sartre, what do you think Sartre answers? What would you answer? Stay at home? Why? But the thing with the Nazis at the time were killing and murdering millions of people, right? They were exterminating Jews in those concentration camps. So if you stay with your mother, then you don't care about these other people? Well, actually, I guess the answer Sartre gave him may not necessarily be something that the student wanted to hear, but the only reasonable one, he says, well, you have to decide based on your heart. I can't tell you this. Nobody can tell you this. There's no universal principle which will answer this, right? The universal principle is not going to tell you that you should abandon your mother, but it also is not going to tell you that you should go fight the Nazis. You have to decide. That's one of those things in life. It's difficult, but that is not something you can base on some sort of abstract principle. The abstract principle is empty. That's Hegel's criticism. It's great, but it's empty. In individual situations, what we decide and how depends on completely different things. So that would be a criticism he produced. And then he says, at the end of the day, the values are communal. Where did you even get this idea that you should take care of your mind? It's a communal value, right? Taking care of other people. This is what we believe in our society. Some other society may have different ideas about it, and if you grow up in this society, maybe they would tell you, well, you should just kill your mother. Be done with it. To us, it seems shocking. But if entire society believes that and you grow up with these people, that may not be as shocking to you. In fact, you may think it's common sense. Why do people think otherwise? So that's the Hegel's point. Society as a whole generates these values. And even people like Martin Luther King, Jesus, Gandhi, they were not rebelling against the society, they were just rebelling against the fact that society did not live up to its own values. The society already, during Martin Luther King's time, recognized that people are equal. In fact, even founding fathers said it. And we all today are puzzled by the fact that they were slaveholders. Right? It seems like so weird. They write out the Declaration of Independence, all this beautiful stuff, and they were the slaveholders. But at the time for the society, it was normal. They were all slaveholders. They didn't see it as a problem. It's later on when we started seeing it as a problem. And then once we all started recognizing it, it became crazy to us. How can you be a slaveholder and write all these beautiful things about every person has the right to pursue happiness and freedom. Every person has the right to freedom, but not the slave. Why do they have no right to freedom? Well, to them, we can't ask them anymore, but I guess they would say, well, that's the way we all live, and that's the way how things are. Even if I give up all my slaves, other people are not going to give up their slaves, so I'm just going to lose a bunch of money. Yes, probably that's what they would say. So that is important part of it. So in the final turn of dialectic, consciousness returns to where it started in Athens, to the world of social roles and institutions we all have. However, there's a difference. At this stage, the acceptance of cultural institutions and norms no longer is unreflective, taken for granted. So then you have to recognize the fact that society organized in this way because we decided that it should be organized in this way, and we all decide how it is, which is why we have democracy, right? The great point about the democracy is we all decide how we live. And it doesn't always work great, but that's the best way to do it. Other than be told how you should live. If you're told how you should live, you feel alienation. You feel others forcing you to do something which you don't want to do. Same thing with your boyfriend or girlfriend. The only way for you to enjoy something is if they willingly agree to do something together. So if they want to go to the movie, and you want to go to the football game, maybe you should together go to a concert or something, something which you both enjoy. And then you both be happy. And if one of you has to give up their happiness and do something they do not enjoy to please you, that's not going to be good. In the end of the day, there's still going to be some of this alienation left, and it will bite you, where. Because next time they want you to give up what you enjoy, and you're not going to want to do that. And then before you know it, you're breaking up. You're yelling at each other every day. And that's not fun. Okay, so his political philosophy, he actually is a big fan of the state. He thinks the state is what gives us freedom, because the only way for us to truly achieve freedom is in the state. But as long as this state is properly organized. And he makes the point that there is no ideal state, like literally no state at his time, or even today, is ideal. You can always do better. Nonetheless, that's the only way to get to this better, because if all of us separate and try to live our own lives separately, that's not going to be good, and we will be worse off than we are within the state. It's just that we should work on the state. We should try to make sure the state actually is responsive to us, responsible to us. Hegel says that this sort of freedom, which we can achieve without the state, is an abstract freedom. And there's a good example in the book about the child, right? Let's say the child wants to have freedom. The child wants to eat sweets all day, but the parents wouldn't let them. So who's right? Should parents give the child their freedom? What would happen if they do? The child would just eat only sweets. What do you think? Did you ever try that? Just sweet stuff.
So the parent would be biased about the kid doesn't get cavities or even diarrhea.
Cavities is not even worth it. Did you try to eat sweets all day? Oh, among other things, you may get a diarrhea, headache, and all sorts of other very unpleasant things, because the sweet stuff is good in moderation. If you eat only sweets, it's not good for your body. And of course, you may discover it the hard way, but I guess your parents don't want you to discover it the hard way. Even though sometimes maybe parents even take this approach. Just let you do whatever the hell you want and then see what happens. And obviously, you learn through your mistakes. But most parents don't want to do it. They want to protect you right away. And that is what takes away your freedom, right? It seems like, some parents, they're not letting us do what we want. But then when you grow up, you realize, no, that actually has helped your freedom. Because once you realize what is the right thing to do, your life became much more free, in a sense. It's just not the restrictive type of freedom. It's the freedom to enjoy your life. So remember the example with the three doors? Again, the same thing. Like if you know which door is right door for you, that doesn't seem to take away your freedom. It seems to give you the freedom. Whereas if you are just going to be randomly trying different doors and getting hurt there, well, that's not really freedom, it's stupidity. So that is the point here. True freedom is just to do what is right. And state, for this reason, is a realization of freedom, because the state also helps you to do what is right for you and what is right for other people. And this is what he says. For the state is not the abstract confronting the citizens. They are part of it, like members of the organic body, where no member is an end and none is the means. It is the realization of freedom, of the absolute final purpose, and exists for its own sake. So the state to him is the highest realization of freedom and the highest way human beings can be organized. Now, again, he does not glorify the status quo. He does not say that, well, if you live in a state, the state is always right, and that's the best way the state can be. There are plenty of states which are horrible, and which oppress their people, and people are not happy there. So, of course, Not every state is fantastic. And the history, in that sense, is the movement towards the better state, right? History is purposeful. It has a goal. It is moving towards this goal. It seems like just a bunch of random things happening. The slaughter bench at which the happiness of peoples, the wisdom of states, and the virtue of individuals have been sacrificed. One war after another war, horrible tyrants, and so on. But he says, no, that actually is just an illusion. In spite of this gloomy picture, there is a redeeming purpose. If you look below the surface at history, you'll see that it has progressed rationally, that it represents the rationality necessary of the world spirit. The spirit whose nature is indeed always one and the same, but whose one nature unfolds in the course of the world. So to him, the whole thing is purposeful. History is progress of the consciousness of freedom. We are moving towards better freedom, better understanding of ourselves and our society. We're not nearly there, but hopefully there is this wonderful time when we achieve that, unless we kill each other before then. So the relation of the person to the states, on the one hand, in pursuing your subjective particular interest, you are a product of your culture. The choices available to you are made possible by your society. On the other hand, the life of the nation is shaped by your decisions and those of the rest of the people. So again, dialectic. You see, that's a dialectic between you and the society. Society should not suppress you. You should not suppress the society. That is the reciprocal relations where both matter. You should understand and respect other people. Other people should understand and respect you. It works all the time, and it never works perfectly, but that is the idea. Point. Okay, so just a few words again in art, religion, and philosophy in the last review. We have about 6 minutes. So he thinks that art, religion, and philosophy try to accomplish the same purpose. They are kind of like different sides of the same coin. They all attempt to comprehend this absolute idea. It's just that do it a little bit differently. So first of all, art, according to Hegel, is the most primitive approach. It's trying to speak the truth about reality by showing it. The artist just represents their idea of reality in images, which Hegel thinks is the most primitive way because it's not very clear. You can kind of feel there's something to art, but you don't even understand exactly what it is. A better way is religion. He thinks religion tries to accomplish exactly the same thing, but it does so in a more clear way through myths. It gives you myths to explain reality. Now, of course, that still has a weakness because a myth is still a little bit vague. And the better way to do it is through philosophy, which does the same thing but in a more clear way, in a more obvious way. So philosophy captures at a much more sophisticated level of understanding what was of value in religion. To him, philosophy is a step up from religion. Religion is a little bit more superstitious, primitive. Philosophy is more rational.